guys, it's me, Stormie, and tonight we are going to talk about the quadrants. Yesterday we covered the hemispheres, which are the four along here that we see, north, south, east, and west, each encompassing 6 houses. But tonight we are going to start to talk about the quadrants. We have 4 different quadrants that we identify in astrology, and each of them tell a little bit about your strength or where your emphasis would be at. So if you were to look at a chart, or you look at your chart and you see that you have a whole handful of planets, usually majority of some planets in a specific quadrant, then you could look for what does that quadrant meaning mean. So let's jump right into that. Now, the first quadrant that we see right here, each of the quadrants has 3 houses. So the first quadrant has houses 1, 2, and 3. So what is this about? Well, it refers to the identity of the self. This is the self house, where you're developing that self, your money, your possessions, your morals, your values. That's all coming from the first house is the self, the second house is the money and values. And of course, the third house is your communication style. And it is the communication style early in life, right? When you're first getting going. So the self-development and self-concern is what we see here. So you see yourself as an independent individual. You feel like you're capable. You own your own life. You organize your own life. Those kinds of things. Now, some of the things that we also see characteristically causing problems when we have a whole bunch of planets, or we can kind of tell something about it in that first quadrant, is that at times we can have individuals that are very self-centered and may have a difficult time admitting that they're self-centered. So it's something that we really have to watch with. But this is such a self-development quadrant. It's going to have its own specific way of expressing itself, but you can pretty much think about that. If it's all about the self, then the way I'm going to express myself is very in a self kind of way, right? Now, the second quadrant over here holds on to houses 4, 5, and 6. The second quadrant, now the first one is all about developing the self. The second is about expanding your awareness towards others, moving outside of yourself. And this is where we begin. In the 4th house, we see family. This extends towards children and intimacy, dating, which we see in the 5th house, and then into that space of health, work, employees. And the 6th house is often over small animals as well. We don't touch on that as much, but that's something that's ruled over there as well. So this quadrant as a whole is going to represent the need for inner security and beginning relationships with other people. Are you receptive to other people and sensitive to maybe some of the unspoken undercurrents that are happening around you or in relationships? That's where we start to identify a little bit more of this. The third quadrant right up here houses 7, 8, and 9. The first quadrant is about self. The second quadrant is we expand our self-awareness out towards others and outside of ourselves. The third quadrant is our awareness expanding even more, but now towards committed relationships, partnerships, now towards some worldly issues, right? This quadrant really outlines a need to relate to society in some way, right? Like you're ready to put yourself out there. This is a conscious quadrant, okay? So when we look at some attributes of this quadrant, one of the things we see is that people with heavy placement in this quadrant will look for relationships with an objective that have an objective rather than for personal reasons. So that can look like, we see people wanting to get married because they think that it's socially acceptable to be married. That's what it should look like, right? They don't actually want to be married necessarily, but there is this undercurrent of this is what's socially acceptable, things like that, right? Because in this quadrant, you now have an outlook on what relationships should be like or what you desire them to look like so that you can kind of craft and mold what the vision of your life is. So it's really the place where I think you find out you have developed some desire to, first of all, be public, right? To be out in the world a little bit more. But at the same time, to play a part. We play a part here. Society says it should look like this, so we play a part right here. Now our last quadrant over here, 10, 11, and 12. The first quadrant is about self. The second quadrant is we expand out towards others and outside of ourselves. The third quadrant is we expand this awareness even more consciously out into social things. And the fourth quadrant refers to your personal efforts out in the world. Like, what do you do to help humanity along, right? What are you giving? What are you adding? What's your contribution to the world? Things like that. So this quadrant really outlines the need to be focused on yourself at a public level. What's your public service? Where are you at socially? You know, where are you at spiritually, those kinds of things. So when we look at a heavy placement over in this fourth quadrant, we're going to see people who strive to make their mark in the world. If this is a heavy quadrant, you know somebody is out in the world doing, or they have the desire to be out in the world doing. And it's really, really beneficial because they are movers and shakers, right? But it can also be disruptive because what this quadrant can sometimes forget is that there is self, right? Like, we have to go home sometimes and not just always be social. So they get caught up in the ideal of giving, 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 and it's not always, they don't always take time for themselves as well. So, but this is a very mission and purpose driven quadrant. So I hope you guys like this video. I hope it explains some things for you. Grab your chart. If you don't have your chart already, click in the description box down below, get your natal chart ordered so that you can look at your wheel and see if you are quadrant heavy or if you are hemisphere heavy. And then we can add another layer into what you're learning, what you already know, and how to interpret some of the things in your chart. All right, guys, and don't forget to get plugged into your birthday appointments if you want one. Those are going very quickly. Also in the description box down below, or come visit me at stormiegrace.com. I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.